She told me I contributed nothing to this family. But what I discovered while babysitting her children for free changed everything, and the revenge I planned left her world in ruins. I'm grateful you're here to listen to my story. Stay with me until the very end, and please comment which city you're watching from so I can see how far my voice has traveled. At 70 years old, I thought I had seen every shade of disrespect life could paint. I had survived a difficult marriage, raised my son Marcus alone after his father walked out, worked double shifts as a nurse for 30 years, and built a life from practically nothing. But standing in my daughter-in-law's pristine kitchen in the wealthy Riverside Hills neighborhood of Phoenix, Arizona, watching her pack her designer handbag for another important business meeting, I realized there were still new ways to be made invisible. "Remember, Dorothy," Sienna said, not even looking at me as she checked her reflection in the hallway mirror, for the third time. "Milo needs his allergy medication at exactly 2 p.m. Don't be late with it, or he'll break out in hives again. And Jade has ballet practice at 4:30, so you'll need to have her dressed and ready by 4:15. Her pink leotard, not the purple one. She's very particular about it." I nodded, wiping my hands on the dish towel I'd been using to clean up the breakfast chaos that Sienna had left behind. Pancake batter splattered across the marble countertop, syrup pooled on the custom Italian tile floor, and dishes piled high in the farmhouse sink that probably cost more than my monthly rent at the Sunview Senior Apartments across town. "Of course, dear," I said softly. "I'll make sure everything is—" "And Dorothy," Sienna interrupted, finally turning to face me. At 34, she was a striking woman, tall, blonde, with the kind of angular features that photographed well for her real estate marketing materials. She'd built a successful career selling luxury homes to Phoenix's elite, and she never let anyone forget it. "And try to keep the house tidy this time. When I came home yesterday, there were toys everywhere in the living room. I shouldn't have to clean up after you and the children." The words stung, but I bit my tongue. The toys had been everywhere because I'd spent 4 hours playing with Milo and Jade, giving them the attention and love they craved while their mother worked 12-hour days and their father, my son Marcus, traveled constantly for his consulting job. But pointing that out would only start an argument I was too tired to have. "I'll do better," I promised, even though the promise tasted like ash in my mouth. Sienna grabbed her keys from the crystal bowl on the entryway table, a wedding gift from Marcus's late father's side of the family, I remembered, and headed for the door. Then she paused, her hand on the doorknob, and turned back with an expression that made my stomach clench. "You know, Dorothy, I've been meaning to talk to you about something." Her voice had that particular tone she used when she was about to say something cruel while pretending it was helpful advice. "Marcus and I have been discussing your situation." "My situation?" I asked carefully. "Your living arrangement. The fact that you're here almost every single day, watching the kids." She waved her hand dismissively, her diamond bracelet catching the morning sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "It's just that we've noticed you don't really contribute anything else to the household besides babysitting. And honestly, that's something we could easily hire someone to do." The words hit me like a physical blow. I help with the children because they're my grandchildren, because I love them." "Of course you do." Sienna's smile was sharp as broken glass. "But love doesn't pay bills, does it? Marcus and I work incredibly hard to maintain this lifestyle. I close million-dollar deals. He consults for Fortune 500 companies. We're building something here, creating generational wealth. And you—" She trailed off, her eyes scanning me up and down in a way that made me feel small and shabby in my simple cotton dress from Target. "What exactly do you do, Dorothy? You watch the kids while we work. That's it. You don't contribute financially. You don't have any useful business connections. You're just here, taking up space and resources." I felt tears pricking at my eyes, but I refused to let them fall, not in front of her, not when she was looking at me like I was some kind of burden she'd been forced to bear. "I raised Marcus on my own," I said quietly, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "I worked 2 jobs to put him through college.
And that was wonderful, Sienna interrupted again, her tone suggesting it was anything but. Really, we're all very grateful for the sacrifices you made 30 years ago. But what have you done lately? What do you contribute to this family now? The question hung in the air like poison gas. Before I could formulate a response, we heard the thundering of small feet on the hardwood stairs. Milo, age 6, came racing into the kitchen, his Spider-Man pajamas twisted around his small body, his dark hair, so much like his father's, sticking up in every direction. "Grandma Dorothy!" he shouted, launching himself into my arms with the fearless enthusiasm only children possess. "Are you staying with us today? Can we build that Lego castle? You promised."
I hugged him tight, breathing in the scent of his strawberry shampoo and the ineffable sweetness of childhood. "Of course, sweetheart. We'll build the biggest castle you've ever seen." "Milo, go get dressed," Sienna said sharply. "Grandma Dorothy isn't here to play. She's here to watch you while the adults work." The dismissive way she said it, like my time with my grandchildren was somehow less valuable than her time showing houses to wealthy buyers, made something crack inside my chest. But Milo didn't notice the tension. He just kissed my cheek and ran back upstairs, already chattering about the castle we would build. Sienna checked her phone, her perfectly manicured nails flying across the screen. "I have to go. I'm showing the Ashford Estate property this morning. $12 million, which means a substantial commission if I close it." She looked up at me with that same cold assessment in her eyes. "Just remember what I said, Dorothy. Marcus and I will be having a serious conversation about your role here, whether it makes sense to keep having you around so much when we could just hire a professional nanny who actually knows what she's doing." She left before I could respond, the door clicking shut with an expensive, solid sound that seemed to echo through the cavernous house. I stood there in the kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of the morning chaos, feeling more alone than I had in years. The house was beautiful, I had to admit. Sienna and Marcus had bought it 3 years ago, right after Sienna's real estate career had taken off. 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen with appliances that cost more than some cars, a backyard with a pool, and a view of Camelback Mountain in the distance. It was the kind of house I dreamed of owning when I was young, when I still believed in fairy tales and happy endings. But it didn't feel like a home. It felt like a showpiece, a testament to Sienna's success and taste, with its neutral color palette and carefully curated art on the walls. There were no family photos displayed, no comfortable, worn furniture where you could curl up and relax. Everything was pristine, perfect, and cold. I moved mechanically through the house, checking on 4-year-old Jade, who was still sleeping, and her princess-themed bedroom, another of Sienna's design choices that prioritize aesthetics over warmth. The little girl was curled up with her stuffed elephant, her thumb in her mouth despite Sienna's constant efforts to break the habit. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. She had no idea that her mother saw her grandmother as nothing more than free labor. As I stood there watching Jade sleep, I thought about the past 2 years since Sienna had asked me to start helping with childcare. At first, it had seemed like a blessing. After I'd retired from nursing at 68, I'd been lonely in my small apartment. My days stretched out endlessly with nothing but daytime television and occasional lunches with other women from my church to break up the monotony. When Sienna had called and asked if I'd be willing to watch the kids a few days a week, I'd been thrilled. "It would really help us out," she had said back then, her voice warm and grateful. "And I know how much you miss Marcus. This way you'd get to see him more often and spend time with your grandchildren. It's perfect, really." And it had been perfect at first. I'd loved every moment with Milo and Jade. I read them stories, taught them songs, helped with homework, kissed scraped knees, and wiped away tears. I'd been there for first words and first steps, for birthday parties and Christmas mornings. I'd poured all the love in my heart into those children, grateful for the opportunity to be part of their lives in such a meaningful way. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, the dynamic had shifted. What started as a few days a week became 5 days a week, then 6. The hours stretched longer and longer. Sienna's emergencies became more frequent. Last-minute showings, important client dinners, networking events that she absolutely couldn't miss. And each time I was expected to drop everything and be available. I'd started keeping a change of clothes at their house because I was there so often.
My own apartment felt like a place I occasionally slept rather than a home. My friends from church stopped inviting me to events because I always had to decline. I was watching the grandchildren. My book club membership lapsed because I couldn't attend meetings. I was watching the grandchildren. My entire life had been consumed by caregiving, and I'd let it happen because I loved Milo and Jade, and because I wanted to be close to my only son. But Marcus was rarely home anymore. His consulting work took him to Seattle, Boston, New York, sometimes for weeks at a time. When he was in Phoenix, he was exhausted, focused on recovering from one trip before embarking on the next. Our conversations were brief and surface level. He'd ask how the kids were doing, thank me for helping out, and then disappear into his home office or collapse in front of the television. Had he even noticed how much time I was spending here? Did he know that his wife spoke to me like I was hired help? No, worse than hired help, because at least employees got paid and had set hours. Did he understand that I'd essentially given up my own life to make theirs more comfortable? The sound of Milo calling for me from his room pulled me from my thoughts. I plastered on a smile and went to help him get dressed, pushing down the hurt and frustration that Sienna's words had stirred up. Whatever else was happening, those children needed me, and I wouldn't let them suffer because of their mother's cruelty.
The morning passed in the usual blur of activity. I made breakfast, real breakfast, not the sugary cereal Sienna usually left out, with scrambled eggs, turkey bacon, and fruit. I helped Milo with his reading homework that he'd forgotten to finish the night before. I braided Jade's hair into the elaborate style she'd seen in a movie, even though my arthritis made my fingers ache. I refereed arguments, wiped up spills, and provided the constant attention and care that children needed, but so often didn't receive in households where both parents were consumed by their careers. By the time I gave Milo his allergy medication at exactly 2 p.m., I was already exhausted. But there was still ballet practice to prepare for, dinner to start cooking, and a mountain of laundry that Sienna had forgotten to do earlier in the week. The pile sat in the laundry room, a silent accusation of my failure to keep up with all the unspoken expectations. I was folding tiny tutus and matching tights when I heard the distinctive ping of an incoming email on the laptop that Sienna kept on the kitchen desk. She used it primarily for managing her calendar and client communications, and she'd given me the password months ago so I could check her schedule and know when she'd be home. I wouldn't normally have looked. I respected privacy, even Sienna's. But the preview notification that popped up on the screen caught my eye. It was from someone named Victoria Chen at Valley View Daycare Center, and the subject line read, "Re-enrollment deposit refund request." My heart started beating faster. Daycare center? Refund request? I knew I shouldn't look. It was none of my business. But something about the email nagged at me, a whisper of intuition born from 70 years of life experience. My hand moved almost of its own accord, clicking to open the full message. What I saw made my blood run cold. "Dear Mrs. Hawthorne," the email began, "thank you for your inquiry regarding the refund of your enrollment deposit for Milo and Jade Hawthorne. As per our policy, the $5,000 deposit is non-refundable once the enrollment process has begun. However, given the circumstances you've described, we are willing to make an exception." I kept reading, my hands beginning to shake. "We understand that you've decided not to proceed with enrollment because you have secured free childcare through a family member. While we're disappointed to lose your children as students, we appreciate you notifying us before the start date. We will process the refund within 7 to 10 business days." The email was dated 6 months ago. 6 months ago, Sienna had been planning to put the children in daycare? She'd paid a deposit, started the enrollment process, and then, what? Decided it was cheaper to exploit me instead? I sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight. My mind was racing, trying to piece together the timeline. 6 months ago was right around when Sienna had started asking me to come over more frequently, when the few days a week had turned into nearly every day, when she'd started leaving longer lists of chores and expectations. She'd been planning to put them in professional childcare, but then she'd realized she could get the same service for free from me.
And not just childcare. I cooked, cleaned, did laundry, ran errands. A nanny would have charged at least $20 per hour for 2 children, probably more. For the amount of time I spent here, that would have been... I did the quick math in my head and felt physically ill. Based on 50 hours a week, and some weeks it was more, at $20 per hour, Sienna was saving approximately $4,000 per month by using me instead of hired help. Nearly $50,000 a year for 2 years. I'd saved them close to $100,000 in childcare costs, not to mention the cooking, cleaning, and a household management I provided. And yet Sienna had stood in this very kitchen this morning and told me I contributed nothing to the family. My hands were shaking as I clicked through to Sienna's set folder, searching for the original correspondence with the daycare center. What I found was a trail of emails that painted an even uglier picture than I had imagined. In her initial inquiry to Valley View Daycare, Sienna had been enthusiastic about enrolling the children. I'm looking for full-time care for my 2 children. I'm a successful real estate agent and my husband travels frequently for work. We need reliable, professional childcare that can handle our demanding schedule. Money is not an issue. I'm willing to pay premium rates for premium care. But then, just a week later, there was an email to someone named Patricia Vance with the subject line, "The Dorothy situation. Advice needed?" I clicked it open with trembling fingers. Patricia, Sienna had written to what appeared to be a friend or colleague. I need your advice on a delicate situation. You know how I've been looking at that expensive daycare for the kids? While Marcus's mother has been hinting that she's lonely since retiring and would love to spend more time with her grandchildren, I'm thinking, why not take advantage of this? She's available, she's free, and she's desperate to feel useful. I could save a fortune on childcare and still get someone to watch the kids full time. The tricky part is managing her expectations. I don't want her to think she's some kind of equal partner in raising the children, or that she has any say in parenting decisions. She needs to understand she's there to help us, not to interfere. I'm planning to gradually increase how much time she spends here, make it seem like we really need her help, and then once she's fully invested, she'll be too emotionally attached to back out. It's perfect, really. Free childcare from someone who actually cares about the kids, and all it costs me is dealing with her occasional neediness.
Patricia's response was just as calculating. Brilliant strategy, Sienna. My sister did something similar with her mother-in-law. The key is to make sure she never feels too comfortable or entitled. Keep reminding her that she's helping you, not the other way around. That way, she stays grateful for the opportunity, rather than expecting anything in return. You're not taking advantage. You're giving her purpose in her retirement. Win-win. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The casual cruelty of it, the calculated manipulation, this wasn't a misunderstanding or a gradual shift in family dynamics. This was a deliberate plan to exploit me, crafted and executed with the cold precision Sienna probably used in her real estate negotiations. But there was more. I kept clicking through emails, each one worse than the last. There was correspondence with Marcus from about a year ago where Sienna had written, "Your mother is becoming a bit too comfortable here. Yesterday, she actually suggested we change Jade's bedtime routine, as if she has any say in how we raise our children. We need to establish clearer boundaries. She's the help, not a co-parent." Marcus's response made my heart break. "You're right. I'll talk to her. Mom sometimes forgets that we're the parents here. I appreciate everything she does, but she needs to respect that these are our decisions to make." My own son. My Marcus, whom I'd raised, sacrificed for, loved unconditionally. He saw me as the help too. There was an email chain between Sienna and her accountant discussing how much money they were saving by using me instead of paid childcare, with Sienna joking that free labor from desperate grandparents is the ultimate tax deduction. There were messages to friends where she mocked me for wearing the same clothes repeatedly. Doesn't she own anything that wasn't purchased during the Reagan administration? For my old-fashioned cooking, she makes everything from scratch like we're living in the 1950s. But I suppose it saves money on takeout. And for being pathetically eager to please whenever they asked me to stay late or come in early. But the worst email
the one that made me physically nauseous, was sent just 2 weeks ago to someone named Richard Crawford, who appeared to be Marcus's boss or senior colleague. "Richard," Sienna had written, "thank you for your advice at dinner last week about maximizing family resources. You were absolutely right that we've been foolish to pay for services we could get for free. Following your suggestion, I'm implementing a more comprehensive strategy with Dorothy, Marcus's mother. She's already providing childcare, but I'm going to start having her handle more household management, grocery shopping, meal planning, organizing, that sort of thing. The more indispensable she becomes, the less leverage she has to negotiate for any kind of compensation or reduced hours. I've learned from selling real estate that the key to a good negotiation is making sure the other party is more invested than you are. Dorothy is emotionally invested in those grandchildren, which means I hold all the cards." Richard's response: "Exactly. You're learning fast. The best employees are the ones who feel grateful for the opportunity to work for you, regardless of compensation. Sounds like you've got a perfect setup. Devoted grandmother who will never quit, can't make demands, and costs you nothing. That's better than any nanny service could offer. Smart thinking, Sienna." I sat at that kitchen desk for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, staring at the screen as the full scope of Sienna's manipulation came into focus. This wasn't just taking advantage of a willing grandmother. This was systematic exploitation, carefully planned and executed with my own son either complicit or willfully blind to what was happening. Every kind word, every "we couldn't do this without you," every "you're such a wonderful grandmother," it had all been calculated to keep me docile, grateful, and under control. Sienna had identified my weaknesses, my loneliness, my love for my grandchildren, my desire to be useful, and she'd weaponized them against me. The sound of Jade calling from upstairs snapped me out of my shocked paralysis. "Grandma, I need help with my ballet shoes." I closed the laptop carefully, my hands still shaking, but my mind suddenly very clear. I couldn't let the children see how upset I was. Whatever happened next, I needed to protect Milo and Jade from the fallout. But as I climbed the stairs to help Jade with her ballet shoes, to braid her hair one more time, to kiss her forehead and tell her she'd be the most beautiful dancer at practice, I made myself a promise. Sienna thought she was smart. She thought she'd found the perfect way to exploit a lonely old woman's love for her grandchildren. She thought I was too desperate, too grateful, too emotionally invested to ever push back. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I'd been a nurse for 30 years. I'd managed emergency rooms, dealt with impossible patients, navigated hospital politics, and solved problems that would have broken weaker people. I'd raised a son on my own, fought off predatory landlords, survived on nothing when money was tight, and built a life from less than nothing. I was 70 years old, and I'd been dismissed, underestimated, and disrespected my entire life because of my age, my gender, my economic status. But one thing I'd learned in all those years was this: the people who underestimate you are the easiest ones to defeat. Sienna wanted to play games? She wanted to manipulate and exploit? Fine.
Two could play at that game, and I had 7 decades of experience she couldn't even imagine. As I drove Jade to ballet practice that afternoon, listening to her chatter excitedly about the recital coming up next month, I was already formulating a plan. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Sienna Hawthorne was about to learn that the worst mistake you can make is underestimating a grandmother's love and her capacity for righteous fury when that love is exploited. The revolution was coming. She just didn't know it yet. The next 3 days were the longest of my life, but I forced myself to act completely normal. Every morning, I showed up at Sienna and Marcus's house with a smile on my face. I made breakfast, packed lunches, braided Jade's hair, helped Milo with his spelling words, and played the role of the grateful, devoted grandmother that Sienna had cast me in. But everything had changed. Where I once saw acts of love and family connection, I now saw a woman being systematically exploited. Every time Sienna asked me to stay late, every forgotten load of laundry she expected me to handle, every last-minute change to the schedule that I was supposed to accommodate without complaint, I saw it for what it really was: manipulation, control, theft of my time, my energy, and my dignity. The hardest part was pretending nothing was wrong when Marcus came home from his trip to Boston on Wednesday evening. I was in the kitchen, making dinner, pot roast with roasted vegetables, one of his childhood favorites that I'd made 1,000 times, when I heard his key in the lock. "Mom," he called out, and for just a moment, my heart lifted the way it always did when I heard my son's voice. Then, reality crashed back down. He saw me as the help. He'd agreed with Sienna that I needed to know my place. "In the kitchen, sweetheart," I called back, keeping my voice steady and warm. Marcus appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie. At 38, he was still a handsome man, tall like his father had been, with kind brown eyes that I'd once thought reflected his gentle soul. Now I wondered if I'd ever really known him at all. "Something smells amazing," he said, dropping his briefcase and coming over to kiss my cheek. "Is that your pot roast?" "Of course, I know it's your favorite." I turned back to the stove, stirring the gravy so he wouldn't see the tears threatening to spill over. "How was Boston?" "Exhausting. 3 days of back-to-back meetings with a client who couldn't make a decision to save his life." He grabbed a beer from the refrigerator, the expensive imported kind that Sienna insisted on buying, and leaned against the counter. "Where's Sienna?" "Showing a property. She said she'd be home by 7. He nodded absently, checking his phone. "And the kids?" "Upstairs. Milo's working on his art project for school, and Jade is having quiet time with her dolls." "Great! Thanks for handling everything, Mom. I don't know what we'd do without you." The words that once would have warmed my heart now felt like acid in my ears. I wanted to scream at him. "You'd pay someone to do what I do for free. You'd hire a nanny and a housekeeper and a cook, and it would cost you thousands of dollars every month. That's what you'd do without me." But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I just smiled and said, "You're welcome, honey. I'm always happy to help." He disappeared upstairs to change, and I was left alone with my thoughts and the simmering pot roast. I needed more information before I could formulate a real plan. I needed to understand the full scope of how Sienna and Marcus saw me, what they were saying to others, and most importantly, what their financial situation really looked like. That laptop in the kitchen was calling to me. I knew it was wrong to snoop. I'd been raised to respect people's privacy, to be honest and straightforward in all my dealings. But those values had gotten me nowhere except exploited and dismissed. Sometimes, I was learning, you had to bend your principles to expose the truth. Over the next several days, whenever I had a spare moment, while the kids were napping or occupied with a movie or playing in the backyard, I carefully went through Sienna's laptop. I was methodical about it, making sure to cover my tracks, never spending too much time in any one place, always leaving things exactly as I'd found them. What I discovered made the email about the daycare center look like just the tip of an ugly iceberg. Sienna kept meticulous financial records, probably a holdover from her real estate training. In a folder labeled Household Budget 2023-2024, I found spreadsheets that laid out their entire financial picture in stark detail. Marcus's consulting income, $185,000 per year. Sienna's real estate commissions, averaging $240,000 per year, with last year being particularly good at $310,000. Combined, they were earning well over $400,000 annually. They were, by any reasonable measure, wealthy. But their expenses were staggering. The mortgage on this house, $4,800 per month. Car payments on Sienna's BMW and Marcus's Audi, $1,900 combined. Private school tuition for Milo at Desert Peak Academy, $18,000 annually. Their country club membership, $15,000 annually. Sienna's personal shopping and beauty expenses, averaging $2,000 per month.
The list went on and on. Vacations, home renovations, furniture, electronics, dining out, wine club memberships, subscription services. They spent money like it was water, maintaining a lifestyle that looked perfect on the outside but required every penny they earned to sustain.
And in a section labeled Cost Savings/Financial Optimizations, there was a line item that made my stomach turn. Childcare, Dorothy, $48,000 annual savings. She'd actually calculated it. She'd put a dollar amount on my exploitation and filed it away under savings like I was a coupon she'd clipped from the Sunday paper. But that wasn't even the worst part. In a subfolder labeled Future Planning, I found a document titled 5-Year Financial Strategy that Sienna had apparently created with help from a financial advisor. The document outlined their plans for the next 5 years. Marcus would continue advancing in his consulting career, aiming for partner level, which would boost his income to $250,000 plus. Sienna would expand her real estate business, possibly hiring junior agents to work under her. They wanted to upgrade to an even larger house in Paradise Valley, Phoenix's most exclusive neighborhood, within 3 years. And there, in a section about ongoing cost management, was a paragraph that made me physically ill. Childcare arrangements. Continue utilizing Dorothy, M's mother, for primary childcare through at least 2027, when Jade starts kindergarten. This provides substantial ongoing savings, $48,000 annually, that can be redirected to investment accounts and lifestyle maintenance. Dorothy's emotional investment in the grandchildren ensures reliability and flexibility that paid childcare cannot match. No changes anticipated to current arrangement. Should Dorothy become unable or unwilling to continue, budget would need significant adjustment to accommodate professional childcare costs. They were planning to use me for at least 3 more years. 3 more years of my life calculated and budgeted like a line item in a business plan. And the phrase, should Dorothy become unable or unwilling, made it clear they'd never even considered that I might have my own needs, my own desires, my own life to live. I was a resource to be exploited until I was no longer useful. My hands were shaking as I photographed the document with my phone. I'd started keeping a careful record of everything I found, storing the photos in a hidden folder on my device. I didn't know exactly what I'd do with this evidence yet, but I knew I'd need it. The deeper I dug, the uglier the picture became. In Sienna's email correspondence, I found messages to her real estate colleagues where she bragged about her free nanny situation and offered advice to others on how to maximize family resources without paying for services. In one particularly galling email to a woman named Jennifer Rosewood, Sienna had written, "The key is making them feel needed and appreciated while keeping clear boundaries about who's actually in charge. My mother-in-law is perfect, desperate to be involved, no social life of her own, and terrified of being cut off from her grandchildren. She'll do anything I ask without complaint. I swear it's better than hiring someone because there's no contract, no set hours, and no legal liability. Family labor is the ultimate loophole." Jennifer's response, "You're a genius. I'm seriously considering having a kid just so I can implement these strategies. The best part is, she's so emotionally invested now that even when I'm a little bit bitchy to her, she just takes it. Yesterday, I told her she contributed nothing to the family besides babysitting, and she just nodded and apologized. These people have been conditioned their whole lives to accept being undervalued. Might as well benefit from it."
Dead? You actually said that to her face? I did. Marcus was worried I went too far, but I told him we need to keep her in her place, or she'll start getting ideas about having opinions. So far, so good. She's been extra helpful and submissive since then. You're playing 4D chess while the rest of us are playing checkers. I had to set the phone down because my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The casual cruelty, the calculated manipulation, the way they laughed about exploiting vulnerable people, it was sociopathic. But there was more. from just 3 days ago. Sienna, Dorothy's been acting a little weird this week. Quiet. I think she might be upset about something. Patricia, did you push too hard? Sienna, maybe, but honestly, what's she gonna do? Leave? She'd be cutting herself off from her only family, her only source of purpose. She's got nothing else in her life. No friends, no hobbies, no money. She needs us way more than we need her. Jennifer, true. Where would she even go? Back to her depressing apartment to watch game shows all day? Sienna, exactly. Plus, Marcus would never choose his mother over me. I've made sure of that. She knows she's replaceable. I've been casually mentioning nanny services in conversation. Just keep her on her toes. The threat of being excluded is all it takes to keep someone like her in line. Melissa, you're terrible and I love it. Sienna, what can I say? I learn from the best. My mom did the same thing with my grandma before she died. Got 10 years of free housework out of her. It's just smart resource management. I sat there in the kitchen, reading and rereading those messages, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't just about being taken advantage of anymore. This was about something much darker. A worldview that saw people, especially older women, as resources to be exploited rather than human beings deserving of respect and dignity. Sienna wasn't just using me. She was proud of using me. She'd turned my exploitation into entertainment for her friends, into a strategy she recommended to others, into proof of her own cleverness and superiority. And my son, my Marcus, whom I'd raised to be kind and compassionate, had gone along with it. He'd been worried she went too far, but hadn't actually done anything to stop it. He chose his wife's cruel games over his own mother's well-being. The betrayal cut so deep, I could barely breathe. But as I sat there in that perfect kitchen with its marble countertops and its professional-grade appliances, surrounded by the evidence of a lifestyle built partially on my stolen labor, I felt something else rising up through the pain. Rage. Pure, clean, focused rage. I was 70 years old. I'd survived poverty, single motherhood, decades of back-breaking work as a nurse, and every other challenge life had thrown at me. I did it with grace, with dignity, with my head held high, even when the world tried to push me down. And I'd be damned if I'd let some spoiled real estate agent and her spineless husband reduce me to a punchline in their group chat. Sienna thought she was smart. She thought she'd figured out how to game the system, how to exploit vulnerable people without consequences. She had no idea what was coming. I spent the rest of that Thursday afternoon taking care of Milo and Jade like I always did, helping with homework, preparing snacks, playing games in the backyard. But my mind was working furiously, sorting through everything I'd learned, analyzing the situation from every angle with the same clinical precision I'd once used to assess patients in the ER. Sienna's weakness was her pride. She was so convinced of her own cleverness, so sure that she'd successfully manipulated me into complete submission, that she'd gotten careless. She'd documented it all. The emails, the text messages, the financial calculations. She created a paper trail of her own exploitation. Marcus's weakness was his passivity. He knew what was happening wasn't right, but he was conflict-averse, more comfortable looking the other way than actually standing up for what was right. He'd choose the path of least resistance every time. And their combined weakness? They were overextended financially. For all their high income, they were living paycheck to paycheck, maintaining a lifestyle they couldn't actually afford without cutting corners. They needed my free labor not just because it was convenient, but because their entire financial house of cards would collapse without it. That gave me leverage. I just needed to figure out how to use it. That evening, after Sienna came home and I'd made my excuses to leave, I drove back to my little apartment at Sunview Senior Living. It was a modest place, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a small kitchen and living area in a building full of other retirees. For months, I'd barely spent any time here, viewing it as just a place to sleep between shifts at Sienna's house. But as I walked in that night and looked around with fresh eyes, I felt something unexpected. Relief. This was my space, my sanctuary. The walls might be thin and the furniture might be secondhand, but nobody here treated me like I was worthless. Nobody here calculated my value in dollar signs and filed it under cost savings. I made myself a simple dinner, soup and a grilled cheese, and sat down at my small kitchen table with my laptop. It was time to figure out exactly what I was going to do.
First, I needed allies. I couldn't fight Sienna and Marcus alone, especially not when they controlled access to my grandchildren. But I had resources they didn't know about. I opened my email and started composing a message to Linda Paulson, a lawyer I'd worked with during my nursing career. Linda had handled medical malpractice cases, and she'd once told me that if I ever needed legal help, I should call her. We'd become friendly over the years, not close friends, but friendly enough that I thought she might be willing to hear me out. "Dear Linda," I typed, "I hope this message finds you well. I'm reaching out because I need some legal advice regarding a family situation that has become untenable. Would you have time for a consultation sometime this week? I'm happy to pay your normal rate. It's regarding potential elder exploitation, and I believe I've gathered substantial documentation." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I composed another email, this one to Father Michael Rodriguez at St. Catherine's Church, where I'd been a member for 20 years before my time had been consumed by childcare duties. "Father Michael," I wrote, "I've been absent from the church community for quite some time, and I owe you an explanation and an apology. I'm writing to ask if you might have time to meet with me this week. I'm dealing with a difficult family situation, and I could use spiritual guidance and possibly help from the church's social services committee." Another click of the send button. Finally, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Rosemary Chen, my best friend from nursing school who'd retired the same year I had. We'd been close once, before I'd let Sienna consume all my time and energy. Rosemary had tried to stay in touch, inviting me to lunch dates and book club meetings, but I'd always been too busy watching the grandchildren. I typed out a text message. "Rosemary, I know it's been too long since we talked, and that's entirely my fault. I need to see you. Are you free for coffee tomorrow morning? I need advice from someone I trust, and there's no one I trust more than you." Her response came within minutes. "Dorothy, of course. How about the morning brew at 9 a.m.? I've missed you." I felt tears prick my eyes. After all the months I'd ignored her invitations, she was still there, still willing to be my friend. That was real love, not the manipulative, conditional affection that Sienna had been offering while she used me. The next morning, Friday, I told Sienna I wouldn't be able to come over until after lunch because I had a doctor's appointment. It was the first time in nearly 2 years that I had put my own needs ahead of her schedule. And the shocked silence on the other end of the phone was almost comical. "A doctor's appointment?" she repeated, as if I'd announced I was flying to Mars. "Can't you reschedule it? I have 3 property showings today, and I need you here with the kids." "No, I can't reschedule it," I said firmly. "It's been on the books for months. I'll be there by 1 p.m. "But Dorothy—" "I'll be there by 1 p.m., Sienna. You'll need to make other arrangements for the morning." I hung up before she could argue further, my heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and exhilaration. That small act of defiance felt like the first crack in the prison walls she'd built around me. The Morning Brew was a cozy coffee shop near downtown Phoenix, the kind of place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. Rosemary was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 large mugs of coffee waiting for me. She stood up when she saw me, and the concern on her face nearly broke my resolve to stay strong. Rosemary was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, with dark hair now streaked with silver and warm brown eyes that had seen too much suffering in her nursing career to ever judge anyone harshly. "Dorothy," she said, pulling me into a tight hug, "you look exhausted. What's going on?" I sat down and wrapped my hands around the warm coffee mug, trying to figure out where to begin. "I've been a fool, Rosemary, a complete and utter fool." "Tell me everything," she said simply. So I did. I told her about the past 2 years, about how gradually I'd been pulled into providing full-time childcare.
I told her about the emails I'd found, about Sienna's text messages with her friends, about the financial calculations that reduced me to a line item in a budget spreadsheet. I showed her the screenshots I'd taken, the evidence of systematic exploitation. By the time I finished, Rosemary's face was tight with anger. That manipulative little... She stopped herself, took a breath. I'm sorry, I know she's your daughter-in-law, but Dorothy, this is elder abuse, financial exploitation. You know that, right? This isn't just being taken advantage of. This is potentially criminal. I know, I said quietly, but I don't want to go to the police or cause some huge scandal. Those children don't deserve to have their family torn apart because their mother is a sociopath. What do you want? It was the question I'd been asking myself all night. What did I want? Revenge? Justice? Just to be treated with basic human dignity? I want them to understand what they've done, I said finally. I want Sienna to face consequences for her cruelty. I want Marcus to have to choose, really choose, between enabling his wife's abuse and doing what's right. And I paused, feeling tears start to fall. I want to still be part of my grandchildren's lives, but not like this, not as unpaid labor as their grandmother. Rosemary reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Then we're going to make that happen, Dorothy. But Dorothy, you need to be smart about this. People like Sienna don't respond to emotional appeals or moral arguments. They respond to leverage, to consequences, to threats to the things they actually care about. Like what?
I stepped into the house, noting with distaste that Vanessa was making herself completely at home in my son's house. Her expensive purse was on the console table. Her designer shoes were by the door. Her presence had taken over. No, thank you, I said coolly. We sat in the living room in uncomfortable silence. I refused to make small talk with this woman who was scamming my family. After about 10 minutes, Donovan appeared, dressed for work in his usual uniform of jeans and a shirt with the Whitmore's Garage logo. He stopped short when he saw me. Mom, what are you doing here? Are you feeling better? Sienna said you had a cold. I need to talk to you, I said. Alone. Donovan glanced at Remessa, who smiled sweetly. Of course. I'll just go get dressed and give you two some privacy. She left the room, but I had no doubt she was listening from somewhere nearby. Mom, what's this about? Donovan asked, sitting down across from me. I opened my folder and pulled out the contracts. Did you authorize these? Donovan took the papers, his face confused as he scanned them. What are these? These are the new contracts for Sienna's wedding. The ones Vanessa signed yesterday using your name. Did you give her permission to do that? She said she was helping, that she was making sure Sienna had a nice wedding. By adding $11,500 to the cost? By upgrading everything without Sienna's permission? Donovan's face flushed. Mom, Vanessa knows about events. She has experience with this stuff. She was just trying to help make Sienna's wedding special. Special or expensive? I pulled out the printout about VH Event Management Solutions. Did you know that Vanessa structured these contracts so that all payments go through her company? Did you know she's taking a 15% cut of every dollar spent on this wedding? Donovan stared at the paper, his face going pale. What are you talking about? Vanessa created a company 3 months ago, right after she learned I was paying for Sienna's wedding. She's been systematically pushing for upgrades and changes, and now she set up contracts that funnel all the money through her business, where she takes a percentage before paying the actual vendors. She's using your daughter's wedding to make money. That can't be right. There must be some mistake. It's all here, Donovan. Business registration, contracts, her website. Your girlfriend is running a scam, and she's using our family to do it. I watched my son's face as he processed this information. Confusion, disbelief, and then, worst of all, defensive anger.
Mom, I think you're misunderstanding what's happening here. Vanessa told me about the management company. It's a legitimate service. Event coordinators charge fees all the time. Did she tell you she was charging Sienna those fees? Did Sienna agree to pay for event management services? Well, no, but there is no but, Donovan. This is fraud. She forged your signature on contracts, committed your daughter to thousands of dollars in expenses she can't afford, and structured everything so she can pocket money in the process. You're being dramatic, Mom. Vanessa loves me. She loves my family. She wouldn't. She did, I interrupted. It's all right here. And yesterday, when Sienna called you upset, you told her she should be grateful. You suggested I should pay the additional $11,500. Did Vanessa tell you to say that? Donovan stood up abruptly. You need to leave. What? I said get out. I don't want to hear any more of this. Sienna is getting a beautiful wedding, better than anything she could have planned herself. If you don't want to help pay for it, fine. But don't come in here with these wild accusations about Vanessa. I gathered my papers slowly, my heart breaking. This was my son, my boy, and he was choosing to believe a con artist over his own mother. When you're ready to see the truth, I said quietly, I'll be here. Don't hold your breath, Donovan said coldly. I walked out of his house into the cool spring morning, tears streaming down my face. Vanessa had won this round. She'd isolated Donovan so completely that he couldn't see what was right in front of him. But I wasn't done fighting, not by a long shot. As I called another cab to take me home, I realized what I needed to do next. If Donovan wouldn't listen to me, maybe Sienna's wedding venue would listen. Maybe the vendors would listen. Maybe if I could prove that Vanessa had no authority to make these changes, I could get the contracts voided. And I knew someone who could help me figure out if that was possible. My nephew, James, was a contract attorney in Philadelphia. It was time to make a phone call.
That's up to you, but I'd suggest, first, back payment for services rendered at fair market rate or a substantial portion of it. Second, a formal written agreement about any future childcare you provide, specific hours, compensation, boundaries, and consequences for violations. Third, a sincere apology and acknowledgement of the exploitation. And fourth, regular, scheduled access to your grandchildren that can't be revoked as punishment or leverage. My head was spinning. And if they refuse? Then you have several options. File a complaint with Adult Protective Services. Pursue civil litigation for the value of stolen services. Or simply walk away and let them deal with the $48,000 annual expense they've been avoiding. Linda's smile was sharp. My guess? Once they see the documentation and understand you're serious, they'll negotiate. People like Sienna are bullies, Dorothy. They prey on those they perceive as weak. But the moment you show strength, they fold. We spent another hour working through the details. Linda assigned one of her associates to begin drafting the formal documentation while she started on the demand letter. By the time I left her office, I had a follow-up appointment scheduled for Wednesday and a retainer agreement that Linda had discounted significantly because I can't stand seeing elderly people exploited. My next stop was the church. St. Catherine's was a modest building in an older part of Phoenix with a small parish that I'd been part of for 2 decades. I'd baptized Marcus here, attended countless services, volunteered for charitable events, but I hadn't been inside in months, too busy with childcare duties to make time for my own spiritual needs. Father Michael Rodriguez met me in his small office, a cramped space filled with books and papers and the kind of comfortable chaos that came from someone who cared more about people than organization. He was in his mid-60s, with gray hair and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. Dorothy Castellano, he said, using my maiden name as he always had. I've missed seeing you at Mass. Please, sit down. I settled into the chair across from his cluttered desk, and suddenly the tears I'd been holding back all morning started to flow. Father Michael handed me a box of tissues and waited patiently while I collected myself. I'm sorry, Father, I said, wiping my eyes. I didn't mean to fall apart like this. Tears are prayers too, my child.
They tell God things our words cannot express. He folded his hands on his desk. Tell me what's troubling you. So I told him. A different version than I told Linda. Less about the legal implications and more about the emotional devastation of being used by my own son and daughter-in-law. About feeling invisible and worthless. About the text messages where Sienna had laughed about exploiting me with her friends. Father Michael listened in silence, his expression growing more troubled as I spoke. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, clearly choosing his words carefully. Dorothy, do you remember the parable of the workers in the vineyard? The landowner who paid everyone the same wage regardless of how long they'd worked? I nodded, not sure where he was going with this. The point of that parable isn't just about God's generosity. It's about the inherent dignity and worth of every person, regardless of their productivity or usefulness. You are not valuable because of what you can do for others. You are valuable because you are a child of God, created in His image, worthy of love and respect simply because you exist. Fresh tears spilled down my cheeks. But I feel so foolish, Father. I let them use me. I saw what was happening and I accepted it because I was afraid of losing my grandchildren. That's not foolishness, Dorothy. That's love. You sacrificed yourself out of love for those children. But Jesus also taught us that we must love ourselves as we love our neighbors. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot care for others if you've allowed yourself to be completely depleted. What should I do? Father Michael leaned back in his chair. I think you know what you need to do. You need to establish boundaries. You need to demand the respect you deserve. And you need to be prepared for the possibility that Sienna and Marcus may not respond well to those demands. I'm afraid they'll cut me off from Milo and Jade. They might try. But Dorothy, from what you've told me, they need you far more than you need them. Not because of what you can do for them, but because their lives will become exponentially more difficult and expensive without your free labor. You have more power in this situation than you realize. We spent another hour talking about boundaries, self-respect, and the difference between love and enabling. Before she left, Father Michael gave me contact information for the church's social services coordinator, who could connect me with support groups for grandparents dealing with difficult family situations. You're not alone in this, he told me as he walked me to the door. There are many grandparents being exploited by their adult children. It's become a silent epidemic in our community. We have resources to help and a support group that meets every Thursday evening. I think you'd find it valuable to connect with others who understand what you're going through. I thanked him and left feeling lighter somehow, despite the weight of everything I was dealing with. Having someone validate my pain, confirm that what was happening to me was wrong, it helped more than I could have imagined.
That evening, I went back to Sienna's house for what I'd told her would be my regular afternoon shift. But everything felt different now. I wasn't walking into my daughter-in-law's home as a grateful supplicant, hoping for scraps of family connection. I was walking in as someone gathering final evidence and preparing for battle. Sienna was in her home office when I arrived, on a video call with what appeared to be clients. She waved at me distractedly and pointed toward the ceiling, indicating the kids were upstairs. I let myself in and climbed the stairs to find Milo and Jade playing in the bonus room. "Grandma Dorothy!" Jade squealed, running to hug my legs. "Can we make cookies? Please, please, please." I knelt down to her level, brushing a strand of blonde hair from her face. She looked so much like her mother, but there was an innocence in her eyes that Sienna had lost somewhere along the way, if she'd ever had it at all. "Of course we can make cookies, sweetheart. What kind do you want to make?" "Chocolate chip, with extra chocolate chips." As I stood up, I caught Milo watching me with an expression that seemed older than his 6 years. "Grandma, are you okay? You seem sad." The perceptiveness of children never ceased to amaze me. I pulled him into a hug. "I'm okay, honey, just thinking about some grown-up stuff. Nothing for you to worry about."
Mom says you might not be able to come over as much anymore. She said they might need to get a real nanny instead." The words felt like a knife between my ribs. She was already threatening my replacement, using it to try to keep me in line, just like she discussed in those text messages with her friends. "Well," I said carefully, "we'll see what happens. But no matter what, I'll always be your grandma, and I'll always love you. That won't ever change." We went downstairs to make cookies, and I tried to focus on the joy of spending time with my grandchildren. Jade's delight when we added extra chocolate chips. Milo's concentration as he carefully placed cookies on the baking sheet. These were the moments that had kept me coming back, day after day, accepting unacceptable treatment. The pure, uncomplicated love of grandchildren. But I noticed things I'd been too immersed to see clearly before. The way the house was set up assumed constant adult supervision, expensive breakables placed at child height, stairs without proper safety gates, cleaning supplies in unlocked cabinets. Sienna had designed this showcase home without really considering child safety because she'd always assumed someone else, me, would be watching the children constantly. I noticed the complete lack of prepared meals in the refrigerator or freezer. Sienna had never learned to cook efficiently because I'd been doing it for her. There were no systems in place for managing the children's schedules, their school commitments, their activities, because I'd been managing all of it. The house looked perfect on the surface, but it functioned only because of my invisible labor. Remove me from the equation, and the whole carefully constructed facade would collapse. While the cookies were baking, Sienna finally emerged from her office. She looked stressed, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled, her makeup smudged around her eyes. "Finally," she said, collapsing onto one of the kitchen bar stools. "That showing was a disaster. The clients loved the house but balked at the price. I spent 2 hours trying to negotiate and got nowhere." She looked at me expectantly. "Is there any coffee made?" In the past, I would have immediately jumped up to make her coffee, to soothe her stress, to be useful. Now I just looked at her calmly and said, "No, but the pot is right there if you'd like to make some." Her eyes widened slightly. I'd never refused one of her implicit demands before, but she recovered quickly. "Never mind. I'll get something on my way to the next showing." She checked her watch. "I have to leave in 20 minutes. Can you stay until Marcus gets home? He said he'd be here by 7. It was Friday evening. In the past, I would have canceled any plans I might have had. Not that I had plans anymore, since I'd let Sienna consume my entire life, and stayed as late as needed. But today I said, "I can stay until 6:30, but then I need to leave. I have other commitments." "Other commitments?" she repeated, as if the concept of me having a life outside of serving her family was incomprehensible. "What commitments?" I said, "Personal commitments," firmly. "If Marcus won't be home by 6:30, you'll need to adjust your schedule." I could see the anger flash across her face, quickly suppressed. She was calculating, trying to figure out if I was just having a bad day or if something fundamental had shifted. "Fine," she said tightly. "I'll make sure Marcus is here by 6:30. She left the kitchen without another word, and I heard her on the phone in the hallway, her voice sharp as she told Marcus he needed to leave work early because your mother is being difficult. But I wasn't being difficult. I was being reasonable. And the fact that setting a simple boundary was interpreted as difficulty told me everything I needed to know about how normalized my exploitation had become. Marcus arrived home at exactly 6:25, clearly annoyed at having to leave work early. He barely acknowledged me as he rushed in, loosening his tie and heading straight for the stairs. "Kids! Dad's home!" Milo and Jade came thundering down from their playroom, and I used the distraction to gather my things. As I headed for the door, Marcus caught up with me.
That evening, I went back to Sienna's house for what I'd told her would be my regular afternoon shift. But everything felt different now. I wasn't walking into my daughter-in-law's home as a grateful supplicant, hoping for scraps of family connection. I was walking in as someone gathering final evidence and preparing for battle. Sienna was in her home office when I arrived, on a video call with what appeared to be clients. She waved at me distractedly and pointed toward the ceiling, indicating the kids were upstairs. I let myself in and climbed the stairs to find Milo and Jade playing in the bonus room. "Grandma Dorothy!" Jade squealed, running to hug my legs. "Can we make cookies? Please, please, please." I knelt down to her level, brushing a strand of blonde hair from her face. She looked so much like her mother, but there was an innocence in her eyes that Sienna had lost somewhere along the way, if she'd ever had it at all. "Of course we can make cookies, sweetheart. What kind do you want to make?" "Chocolate chip, with extra chocolate chips." As I stood up, I caught Milo watching me with an expression that seemed older than his 6 years. "Grandma, are you okay? You seem sad." The perceptiveness of children never ceased to amaze me. I pulled him into a hug. "I'm okay, honey, just thinking about some grown-up stuff. Nothing for you to worry about." "Mom says you might not be able to come over as much anymore. She said they might need to get a real nanny instead." The words felt like a knife between my ribs. She was already threatening my replacement, using it to try to keep me in line, just like she discussed in those text messages with her friends. "Well," I said carefully, "we'll see what happens. But no matter what, I'll always be your grandma, and I'll always love you. That won't ever change." We went downstairs to make cookies, and I tried to focus on the joy of spending time with my grandchildren. Jade's delight when we added extra chocolate chips. Milo's concentration as he carefully placed cookies on the baking sheet. These were the moments that had kept me coming back, day after day, accepting unacceptable treatment. The pure, uncomplicated love of grandchildren. But I noticed things I'd been too immersed to see clearly before. The way the house was set up assumed constant adult supervision, expensive breakables placed at child height, stairs without proper safety gates, cleaning supplies in unlocked cabinets. Sienna had designed this showcase home without really considering child safety because she'd always assumed someone else, me, would be watching the children constantly. I noticed the complete lack of prepared meals in the refrigerator or freezer. Sienna had never learned to cook efficiently because I'd been doing it for her. There were no systems in place for managing the children's schedules, their school commitments, their activities, because I'd been managing all of it. The house looked perfect on the surface, but it functioned only because of my invisible labor. Remove me from the equation, and the whole carefully constructed facade would collapse. While the cookies were baking, Sienna finally emerged from her office. She looked stressed, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled, her makeup smudged around her eyes. "Finally," she said, collapsing onto one of the kitchen bar stools. "That showing was a disaster. The clients loved the house but balked at the price. I spent 2 hours trying to negotiate and got nowhere." She looked at me expectantly. "Is there any coffee made?" In the past, I would have immediately jumped up to make her coffee, to soothe her stress, to be useful. Now I just looked at her calmly and said, "No, but the pot is right there if you'd like to make some." Her eyes widened slightly. I'd never refused one of her implicit demands before, but she recovered quickly. "Never mind, I'll get something on my way to the next showing." She checked her watch. "I have to leave in 20 minutes. Can you stay until Marcus gets home? He said he'd be here by 7. It was Friday evening. In the past, I would have canceled any plans I might have had. Not that I had plans anymore, since I'd let Sienna consume my entire life, and stayed as late as needed. But today I said, I can stay until 6:30.
But then I need to leave. I have other commitments. Other commitments? She repeated, as if the concept of me having a life outside of serving her family was incomprehensible. What commitments? I said, personal commitments, firmly. If Marcus won't be home by 6:30, you'll need to adjust your schedule. I could see the anger flash across her face, quickly suppressed. She was calculating, trying to figure out if I was just having a bad day or if something fundamental had shifted. Fine, she said tightly. I'll make sure Marcus is here by 6:30. She left the kitchen without another word, and I heard her on the phone in the hallway, her voice sharp as she told Marcus he needed to leave work early because your mother is being difficult. But I wasn't being difficult. I was being reasonable. And the fact that setting a simple boundary was interpreted as difficulty told me everything I needed to know about how normalized my exploitation had become. Marcus arrived home at exactly 6:25, clearly annoyed at having to leave work early. He barely acknowledged me as he rushed in, loosening his tie and heading straight for the stairs. "Kids! Dad's home!" Milo and Jade came thundering down from their playroom, and I used the distraction to gather my things. As I headed for the door, Marcus caught up with me.
That evening, I went back to Sienna's house for what I'd told her would be my regular afternoon shift. But everything felt different now. I wasn't walking into my daughter-in-law's home as a grateful supplicant hoping for scraps of family connection. I was walking in as someone gathering final evidence and preparing for battle. Sienna was in her home office when I arrived, on a video call with what appeared to be clients. She waved at me distractedly and pointed toward the ceiling, indicating the kids were upstairs. I let myself in and climbed the stairs to find Milo and Jade playing in the bonus room. "Grandma Dorothy!" Jade squealed, running to hug my legs. "Can we make cookies, please, please, please?" I knelt down to her level, brushing a strand of blonde hair from her face. She looked so much like her mother, but there was an innocence in her eyes that Sienna had lost somewhere along the way, if she'd ever had it at all. "Of course we can make cookies, sweetheart. What kind do you want to make?" "Chocolate chip, with extra chocolate chips." As I stood up, I caught Milo watching me with an expression that seemed older than his 6 years. "Grandma, are you okay? You seem sad." The perceptiveness of children never ceased to amaze me. I pulled him into a hug. "I'm okay, honey. Just thinking about some grown-up stuff. Nothing for you to worry about." "Mom says you might not be able to come over as much anymore," he said quietly. "She said they might need to get a real nanny instead." The words felt like a knife between my ribs. She was already threatening my replacement, using it to try to keep me in line, just like she'd discussed in those text messages with her friends. "Well," I said carefully, "we'll see what happens. But no matter what, I'll always be your grandma, and I'll always love you. That won't ever change." We went downstairs to make cookies, and I tried to focus on the joy of spending time with my grandchildren. Jade's delight when we added extra chocolate chips, Milo's concentration as he carefully placed cookies on the baking sheet. These were the moments that had kept me coming back, day after day, accepting unacceptable treatment, the pure, uncomplicated love of grandchildren. But I noticed things I'd been too immersed to see clearly before. The way the house was set up assumed constant adult supervision, expensive breakables placed at child height, stairs without proper safety gates, cleaning supplies in unlocked cabinets. Sienna had designed the showcase home without really considering child safety because she'd always assumed someone else, me, would be watching the children constantly. I noticed the complete lack of prepared meals in the refrigerator or freezer. Sienna had never learned to cook efficiently because I'd been doing it for her. There were no systems in place for managing the children's schedules, their school commitments, their activities, because I'd been managing it all. The house looked perfect on the surface, but it functioned only because of my invisible labor. Remove me from the equation, and the whole carefully constructed facade would collapse. While the cookies were baking, Sienna finally emerged from her office. She looked stressed, her usual perfect hair slightly disheveled, her makeup smudged around her eyes. "Finally," she said, collapsing onto one of the kitchen bar stools. "That showing was a disaster. The clients loved the house, but balked at the price. I spent 2 hours trying to negotiate and got nowhere." She looked at me expectantly. "Is there any coffee made?" In the past, I would have immediately jumped up to make her coffee, to soothe her stress, to be useful. Now, I just looked at her calmly and said, "No, but the pot is right there if you'd like to make some." Her eyes widened slightly. I had never refused one of her implicit demands before. But she recovered quickly. "Never mind, I'll get something on my way to the next showing." She checked her watch. "I have to leave in 20 minutes. Can you stay until Marcus gets home? He said he'd be here by 7. It was Friday evening. In the past, I would have canceled any plans I might have had. Not that I had plans anymore, since I'd let Sienna consume my entire life, and stayed as late as needed. But today, I said, I can stay until 6:30, but then I need to leave. I have other commitments. "Other commitments?" Sienna repeated, as if the concept of me having a life outside of serving her family was incomprehensible. "What commitments?" "Personal commitments," I said firmly. "If Marcus won't be home by 6:30, you'll need to adjust your schedule." I could see the anger flash across her face, quickly suppressed. She was calculating, trying to figure out if I was just having a bad day or if something fundamental had shifted. "Fine," she said tightly. "I'll make sure Marcus is here by 6:30. She left the kitchen without another word, and I heard her on the phone in the hallway, her voice sharp as she told Marcus he needed to leave work early because your mother is being difficult. But I wasn't being difficult. I was being reasonable. And the fact that setting a simple boundary was interpreted as difficulty told me everything I needed to know about how normalized my exploitation had become. Marcus arrived home at exactly 6:25, clearly annoyed at having to leave work early. He barely acknowledged me as he rushed in, loosening his tie and heading straight for the stairs. "Kids, Dad's home!" Jade and Milo came thundering down from their playroom, and I used the distraction to gather my things. As I headed for the door, Marcus caught up to me. "Mom, wait, can we talk for a minute?" We stepped out onto the front porch, and I could see the confusion and frustration on his face. "What's going on with you lately? Sienna says you're being inflexible about scheduling. You had that doctor's appointment this morning, and now you're leaving at 6:30 on the dot instead of staying for dinner like usual." "I'm setting boundaries, Marcus. Something I should have done 2 years ago." "Boundaries? Mom, we need your help with the kids. You know how demanding our schedules are." "I do know. I also know that you and Sienna make over $400,000 a year and could easily afford to pay for the childcare and household help you've been getting from me for free." I watched his face go pale. "Yes, Marcus, I know exactly how much money you make. I know how much you're saving by using me. I know about the 5-year financial plan where I'm listed as an ongoing cost management strategy. How did you—" He stopped himself, realizing that admitting he knew about those documents would be an admission of guilt. "I found the emails, Marcus, the text messages, the budget spreadsheets. I know everything. I know that Sienna planned this from the beginning, that she intentionally manipulated me into providing free labor so you could maintain your expensive lifestyle. And I know that you've gone along with it even when you suspected it was wrong." Marcus's face cycled through several emotions: shock, guilt, anger, defensiveness. "Mom, that's not fair. We appreciate everything you do. We've never forced you to help us." "You didn't have to force me. You just had to make me believe that being useful was the only way to be part of this family. You had to make me afraid that setting boundaries or asking for respect would mean losing access to my grandchildren."
I felt tears starting, but pushed them back. I raised you better than this, Marcus. I taught you to treat people with dignity and respect. When did you forget those lessons? This is Sienna's fault, he said, his voice rising slightly. She's the one who— Don't you dare put this all on her, I interrupted. You're a grown man. You made choices. You saw what was happening, and you allowed it because it was convenient for you. That makes you just as responsible. We stood there in the evening air, the sound of children's laughter drifting from inside the house, and I saw my son clearly for perhaps the first time in years. He wasn't the man I'd thought I'd raised. He was someone who'd chosen comfort over character, who'd sacrificed his own mother's dignity for the sake of domestic peace and financial savings. "What do you want from us?" he finally asked, his voice small. "Respect, a sincere apology, and fair compensation for the services I've provided, or at minimum, a formal agreement about any future help I choose to give, with set hours, clear boundaries, and no more manipulation or exploitation. And if we can't agree to that," I looked him straight in the eye, "then you'll need to hire the nanny you've been threatening me with, and you'll need to explain to Milo and Jade why Grandma Dorothy doesn't come around anymore. But Marcus, make no mistake, if you force me to walk away, I won't do it quietly. I have evidence of systematic elder exploitation. I have a lawyer, and I have options you haven't even considered yet." I left him standing there on the porch, mouth slightly open, clearly shocked that his compliant, grateful mother had developed a spine. The drive back to my apartment felt longer than usual, giving me time to process the confrontation. I'd actually done it. I'd stood up to my son, drawn a line in the sand, made it clear that the old dynamic was over. But I also felt a gnawing anxiety in my stomach. What if they called my bluff? What if they decided they'd rather hire professional help than give in to my demands? What if I really did lose access to Milo and Jade? When I got home, I found a message from Rosemary on my phone. "Thursday support group at the church, 7 p.m. I'm going with you, no arguments. You need to meet other people dealing with this. You'll see you're not alone." I also had an email from Linda Paulson's office with a draft of the documentation she had prepared. The subject line read, "Initial Review, Costello versus Hawthorne Family Exploitation Case." Just seeing it laid out that formally, exploitation case, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was a legal matter with real consequences. I opened the attachment and began reading. Linda and her associate had done a thorough job. The timeline was comprehensive, documenting every escalation in expectations over the 2-year period. The financial analysis calculated the value of my services at fair market rates, $52,800 for childcare alone, plus an additional $18,200 for housekeeping, cooking, and errands. Total, $71,000 over 2 years. But more devastating was the section on emotional exploitation and psychological manipulation. Linda had pulled quotes from Sienna's text messages and emails and presented them as evidence of intentional, calculated abuse. She's so emotionally invested now that even when I'm a little bit bitchy to her, she just takes it. The key is making them feel needed and appreciated while keeping clear boundaries about who's actually in charge. She needs us way more than we need her. She's got nothing else in her life. Seeing those words in a legal document, stripped of context and presented as evidence of wrongdoing, made them even more horrifying. This is how my daughter-in-law actually saw me. Not as a person deserving of love and respect, but as a resource to be managed and manipulated.
The draft demand letter was equally direct. It outlined 4 requirements: back payment of $50,000 for services rendered over the past 2 years, a discount from the calculated $71,000 as a gesture of family goodwill, A formal written agreement for any future childcare or household assistance specifying exact hours, appropriate compensation at market rates, and clearly defined boundaries. A written apology acknowledging the exploitation and committing to treating Dorothy Castellano Hawthorne with respect and dignity going forward. A grandparent visitation agreement guaranteeing regular access to Milo and Jade Hawthorne that cannot be revoked or modified without just cause and mutual agreement. The letter concluded with a statement that failure to meet these requirements within 30 days would result in filing formal complaints with Adult Protective Services and pursuing civil litigation for the full value of stolen services, plus damages for emotional distress. It was aggressive. It was confrontational. It was exactly what I needed. I called Linda's office and left a message approving the documentation and authorizing her to finalize the demand letter. "Send it certified mail," I said. "I want proof they received it." Then I sat down at my small kitchen table and did something I hadn't done in years. I cried. Not quiet, hidden tears like I'd shed in Sienna's bathroom while scrubbing her toilet, but loud, gasping sobs that came from somewhere deep in my chest, where I'd been storing 2 years of hurt and humiliation. I cried for the time I had lost, for the friendships that had withered, for the hobbies I had abandoned, for the life I'd given up trying to be useful enough to earn my place in my own family. But I also cried with relief. Because for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't pretending anymore. I wasn't smiling through pain or accepting the unacceptable. I was fighting back. And win or lose, that felt like freedom. The certified letter arrived at Sienna and Marcus's house on Wednesday morning. I knew because Linda's office sent me a notification showing it had been signed for by Sienna herself at 9:47 a.m. I imagined her opening that envelope, reading the formal legal documentation of her exploitation, seeing the dollar amounts and the quotes from her own text messages laid out as evidence. I wondered if she felt any shame at all. My phone started ringing at 10:15 a.m. Sienna. I let it go to voicemail. She called again immediately. Voicemail. Then Marcus called. Voicemail. Then Sienna again, 3 times in a row. Finally, a text message from Marcus. "Mom, please call us. We need to talk about this letter. This is insane. You're tearing this family apart." I stared at that message for a long moment. I was tearing the family apart? Not them, with their calculated exploitation and casual cruelty. Not Sienna, who'd bragged to her friends about manipulating me. Not Marcus, who chose to enable his wife's abuse rather than stand up for his own mother. The audacity of it would have been almost funny if it weren't so painful. I texted back, "You have 30 days to respond to the demands in the letter. Until then, we have nothing to discuss. If you need childcare, I suggest you contact Valley View Daycare Center. They still have my recommendation on file." 3 dots appeared immediately, showing he was typing. Then they disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, "You're really going to do this? You're going to destroy your relationship with your grandchildren over money?" Over money. That's what he thought this was about. I typed back, "This isn't about money, Marcus. It's about respect. It's about being treated like a human being instead of free labor. It's about your wife calling me the old lady behind my back and laughing about exploiting me. It's about you knowing it was wrong and doing nothing. The 30-day clock is ticking." I turned off my phone after that. I couldn't handle the barrage of calls and messages I knew would follow. Thursday evening, Rosemary picked me up for the support group at St. Catherine's Church. I'd been nervous about attending, worried about sharing my story with strangers, but Rosemary had been insistent. "You need to hear other people's stories. You need to know you're not alone in this." The meeting was held in the church's community room, a modest space with folding chairs arranged in a circle. When we arrived, there were already about 12 people there, mostly women, ranging in age from their 60s to their 80s. Father Michael was there too, along with a woman he introduced as Margaret Santos, a social worker who facilitated the group.
Welcome, Margaret said warmly as we took our seats. This is a safe space for grandparents who are navigating difficult family dynamics. Everything shared here stays here, and we're all here to support each other without judgment. As the meeting began and people started sharing their stories, I felt tears welling up. Every story was different in its details, but the core pattern was heartbreakingly familiar. Adult children who demanded free childcare while working full-time, daughters-in-law who treated their husbands' mothers like servants, sons who chose their wives over their parents even when the treatment was clearly abusive, financial exploitation disguised as helping the family. A woman named Patricia, who had to be close to 80, talked about how her daughter had moved back home with 3 children after a divorce, then refused to contribute to household expenses while demanding Patricia provide full-time childcare. She said, "I'm exhausted. I raised my children already. I thought retirement would be about rest and enjoying my golden years. Instead, I'm more tired than I've ever been, and my daughter treats me like I'm being selfish if I ask for a single day off."
Another woman, Susan, described how her son and daughter-in-law had promised to pay her for babysitting, then constantly forgot or claimed they were short on money, despite taking expensive vacations and driving luxury cars. "They owe me over $15,000 now," she said, "but if I push too hard about payment, they threaten to cut off my access to my grandchildren. I feel trapped." A man named Robert, one of only 2 men in the group, talked about how his daughter had moved across the country and now used video calls with his grandchildren as leverage. "If I don't send money when she asks, suddenly the kids are too busy to video chat. I've spent my entire retirement savings trying to maintain a relationship with grandchildren I barely get to see." Story after story, each one a variation on the same theme. Adult children exploiting their aging parents' love for their grandchildren, using that love as a weapon to extract free labor, free money, free everything. When it was my turn to share, I found myself speaking more honestly than I'd expected. I told them about Sienna's emails and text messages, about the calculated manipulation, about feeling invisible and worthless in my own son's home. I told them about finding the financial records that reduced me to a line item in a budget spreadsheet. "But I'm fighting back now," I said, feeling a surge of strength as I spoke the words aloud. "I hired a lawyer. I sent a demand letter. I'm not accepting this treatment anymore." The room was silent for a moment, and then Patricia started clapping. Then Susan joined in, and then everyone was applauding, and I realized many of them were crying. Not sad tears, but tears of vicarious triumph, of hope that maybe they could fight back too. After the meeting, several people came up to me asking for Linda Paulson's contact information. Margaret pulled me aside and said, "Dorothy, what you're doing is incredibly brave. Most people in your situation feel so trapped by their fear of losing their grandchildren that they never push back. You're modeling what's possible." "I'm terrified," I admitted. "What if they really do cut me off from Milo and Jade?" "Then you document it and you sue for grandparent visitation rights," Margaret said firmly. "Arizona has strong grandparent rights laws. If you've been providing regular care and have an established relationship with the children, the court will likely grant you visitation. Your daughter-in-law probably doesn't know that, which means she's been using a threat she can't actually follow through on." This information felt like armor. Sienna's biggest weapon, threatening my access to the grandchildren, wasn't as powerful as she thought it was. The law was on my side. The 30 days crawled by. Marcus called twice more, leaving voicemails that alternated between guilt-tripping, "How can you do this to your own son?" and minimizing, "Can't we just talk about this like adults instead of involving lawyers?" Sienna never called directly, but I heard through Rosemary's network that she'd been complaining to everyone who would listen about her ungrateful mother-in-law who's trying to extort money from the family. On day 23, Linda called me. "They want to negotiate." My heart started racing. What are they offering? "They're willing to pay you $20,000 as a gift for your help over the years. They'll agree to a formal schedule for any future babysitting, not to exceed 20 hours per week, but they want you to provide it for free because that's what grandparents do.
No written apology, and they want the grandparent visitation agreement removed from the demands, claiming it's insulting to suggest they would ever keep you from your grandchildren. That's insulting, I said, feeling anger rise in my chest. They're offering less than a third of what they owe me, still expecting free labor, and refusing to acknowledge what they did was wrong. That's what I thought you'd say, Linda replied, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. So, here's what we're going to do. We're going to file the complaint with Adult Protective Services today. We're also going to file a civil suit for the full value of services rendered, plus emotional damages. And we're going to file for formal grandparent visitation rights. Let's show them what happens when they try to lowball someone who's serious. Won't that make everything worse? Short term, maybe. Long term, it's the only way to establish real boundaries and consequences. Dorothy, people like Sienna only respect power. Right now, they still think you'll back down if they just wait you out. We need to show them you won't. The complaint to Adult Protective Services triggered an investigation. A caseworker named James Chen contacted me for an interview, then interviewed Sienna and Marcus separately. The civil suit filing meant they had to hire their own lawyer, adding thousands of dollars to their expenses. And the grandparent visitation rights petition meant they had to appear in family court. Suddenly, their perfect life wasn't so perfect anymore. Through Rosemary, I heard that Sienna had been forced to actually hire a nanny at $25 per hour for 2 children, 50 hours per week. The monthly cost was devastating to their carefully balanced budget. Marcus had to cut back on his travel to be home more to help with the children. They'd canceled their country club membership and put their vacation home in Sedona up for sale. Their house of cards was collapsing, exactly as I'd predicted. On day 29, one day before the deadline, Linda called me again. They're ready to settle. Full settlement. Everything you asked for. We met at Linda's office. Me, Linda, Marcus, Sienna, and their lawyer, a weary-looking man who clearly wished he was anywhere else. The tension in that conference room could have been cut with a knife.
Sienna looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled, her makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes, and there was a tightness around her mouth that suggested she was barely holding herself together. Marcus looked defeated, slumped in his chair, refusing to meet my eyes. Their lawyer laid out the settlement terms. $50,000 payment within 90 days, a formal written agreement for any future assistance specifying no more than 15 hours per week at $25 per hour, paid bi-weekly, a written apology acknowledging the exploitation, and a grandparent visitation agreement guaranteeing me time with Milo and Jade every week with the understanding that I could take them for overnight visits once per month. "Do you agree to these terms?" the lawyer asked Sienna and Marcus. Marcus nodded immediately. Sienna sat rigid for a long moment, and I could see the war happening behind her eyes. Finally, she said, "Yes." "Then let's sign." The paperwork took an hour. Multiple documents, multiple signatures, everything formalized and legally binding. When it was done, the lawyer shook hands with Linda and left quickly, clearly relieved to be finished with this case. Marcus, Sienna, Linda, and I sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Then Marcus said, quietly, "Mom, I'm sorry. I really am. I didn't realize how bad it had gotten. I should have protected you instead of going along with it." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw genuine remorse in his eyes. "You hurt me, Marcus. Deeply. But I'm willing to work on rebuilding our relationship if you're truly committed to change." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I am. I promise." Then I turned to Sienna. She was staring at the table, her jaw clenched. "Sienna, I need to hear it from you." She looked up at me, and for just a moment, I saw pure hatred flash across her face. Then she schooled her features into something resembling contrition. "I apologize for how I treated you. It was wrong." The words were empty, mechanical, clearly forced. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry she'd been caught and forced to face consequences. But I'd stopped expecting genuine remorse from her. The legal agreement was enough. She couldn't hurt me anymore.
3 months later, I was sitting in my apartment, which no longer felt like just a place to sleep, but like home again, with Milo and Jade for our first official overnight visit. We'd made pizza together, built a massive blanket fort in the living room, and we're now watching a movie while eating popcorn. "Grandma," Jade said, snuggling against my side, "I like staying at your house. It's cozy." "I'd like it too, sweetheart," I said, kissing the top of her head. Milo looked up at me seriously. "Are things better now with you and Mom and Dad?" Smart child. He'd noticed the tension, the changes in our family dynamic. I told him, "Things are different. But different can be good. Grandma learned that she needs to take care of herself too, not just other people. And that's okay." He seemed to accept this and turned back to the movie. My phone buzzed with a text from Rosemary. "Dinner next week? I found a new Thai place that's supposed to be amazing." I smiled and texted back, "Absolutely. Wednesday work for you?" I also had a message from Margaret, the support group facilitator. "3 new members joined because of your story. You're inspiring people, Dorothy." And there was an email from Linda. "First payment of $16,666 received and deposited to your account. Remaining balance due in 60 days. I set my phone down and looked around my little apartment with my grandchildren tucked against my sides, warm and safe and loved. My life wasn't perfect. My relationship with Marcus was still healing, and Sienna and I would probably never be close. But I had my dignity back. I had boundaries. I had a life of my own again. And most importantly, I'd learned that standing up for yourself, even when it's terrifying, even when you risk losing everything, is sometimes the only way to save yourself. Sienna had thought she could exploit a lonely old woman's desperation to be useful. She'd underestimated the strength that comes from 70 years of surviving, of overcoming, of refusing to be broken by a world that constantly tries to diminish you. She'd learned her lesson, and I'd learned mine too, that I was worth fighting for, no matter what anyone else thought. Thank you for following my story to the end. I hope it inspires anyone facing similar exploitation to know that you deserve respect, dignity, and justice, regardless of your age. Please comment below with your thoughts and let me know what city you're watching from. Your support means everything.